Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. I'm joined this morning by my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Mark Gelman, and we want to wish our friend and colleague, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch, a very happy birthday. She's taking the morning to celebrate her birthday with her family. So we wish her
happy birthday, Sherry.
Happy birthday, Sherry. Well, we're delighted to have you here with us this morning. This morning in the Torah, we're beginning the book of Vayikra, which is the third book of the Hebrew Bible. It's the book that includes all of the laws and traditions given to the priesthood about sacrifices that ought to be offered in the Mishkan and then eventually in the Holy Temple. But we're going to,
and are we going to talk about that, Rabbi Feinstein?
And we're going to set that aside this week, Rabbi Gelman, because it's almost Passover. And in my house, there's already bags and bags of Passover food being stacked up in the corners as we begin to clear off the countertops and contemplate all that horrible stuff in the back of the refrigerator and think about getting ready for Passover, inviting people over. This year, of course, like in last year, we're trying to manage the safety of the holiday with COVID against the deep impulse to gather as a family, we gather with friends, and to celebrate the Passover. So let's begin with the conversation about Passover, begin to help us get ready. As you've pointed out, Rabbi Gelman, in ancient synagogues and medieval synagogues, there was only 2 times a year when rabbis actually gave sermons, lucky congregants. One was the afternoon of Yom Kippur, which was a time for a tshuva. And the other, of course, was...
Well, and the other reason was people were asleep then.
Well,
so it didn't matter what the rabbis had to say then.
And the other, of course, was Shabbos HaGadol, which will be next week. It's the Sabbath directly preceding the holiday of Passover. And there the concern was what's kosher for Passover,
right?
How to clean, how to prepare, how to get ready for Passover. But I think that it is time to expand that tradition, not only past Shabbos HaGadol, but to expand it to a much broader sensibility. So let me phrase the question this way. According to the National Population Studies and the Pew Report, about 90% of American Jews are going to be participating in a Passover Seder. Now, what's remarkable about that is that of that population, about 20%, when asked, what is your current religion, check the box labeled none. Like not Christian, not Jewish, not Muslim, none, no religion whatsoever. And among younger Jews, the number is as high as 33%. And then within the population that identifies as Jewish, you have even a larger population of those who are not affiliated, not expressive of their Judaism in any particular outward way. And so it is a time for the gathering of the tribe, for the community to gather, families to gather around a Seder table, to take up the haggadah, to take up the haggadah, and to tell the story of the Pesach. So Rabbi Gelman, what story shall we tell them? And what is the message of Passover? Specifically, what is the message of the Seder night to those Jews who are alienated from the tradition? She'eno yodea lishol, the ones who are really silenced at the table because they have no connection to the ongoing celebration of Jewish life, who don't have a prayer life that we can recognize, who don't have an affiliation or an observance that we can recognize. They're going to be coming to my Seder table. They're going to be waiting for the Seder. What should I tell them?
Right. Well, I'm glad this is your problem because I don't ever show up to the Seder until halfway through. That way I can avoid the question.
And you're playing the role of Elijah, no doubt.
Yeah, it's sort of like that. Look, it's interesting that we had Father Tom Hartman, may his memory be blessed, at all our Seders, and he loved the Seder, and it's very common for Jewish families to have non-Jewish guests at Seder, very common and laudable idea. And he loved it because, and I learned so many things from a priest about being Jewish. It's remarkable. But one of the things, when I would ask him, why do you love the Seder so much? And he gave me insight as to why I love it. First, he said, it's your family. How many times during the year does your family gather for a meal?
Rarely, right?
Almost never.
We're spread out all over the place.
And if it's high holidays, you're gathering and you're rushing through the meal to get to synagogue.
Mhm.
So this could be for most people, and is for many people, the only time their family gets together. The second thing, and that is praiseworthy. That's simply praiseworthy, to just get your family together and to remind people you didn't come from nowhere, you came from these people. Now, there are many Seders, Sedarim, of friends where there are no family there. They're just a bunch of Jewish friends and others who gather for Seder, and that's good too, because these people are your most significant people in your life. Mm-hmm. So you gather with them and reaffirm your bonds of love and friendship. So whether it's family or friends, it's important to be together. Secondly, is the way it's laid out. It's perfect. It has ritual foods. And it's funny that Jews don't think of foods in a ritual way. We think of food a lot, but we don't think of foods as ritual. And Tommy did, of course, because of the Eucharist. The Mass for him, we forget and don't know that much because we're Jews. The Mass is a meal. The Eucharist is bread, and wine is wine. And so by transforming it in Christianity, they made a whole sacrament out of it. Well, we have our sacrament in a way. Martin Buber made a beautiful comparison between the Eucharist and the Seder. He said one is a meal eaten for God, the Passover Seder, and one is a meal eaten of God, and that is the Eucharist. Buber was good with words and good with ideas. And so we have a meal eaten for God, and the foods are simple and ritually perfect. That is, when you dip karpas, when you dip parsley, greens, into salt water, it's just, you don't have to explain what that means. You do, but it's so obvious. The tears are the tears of the salt water, and the parsley is the green of the new season. And when you have charoset, that's the mortar, and the matzah, that was bread that was baked quickly. And the bitter herbs were the bitterness of slavery. And, the shank bone, which you don't eat, but you see on the display table, the display plate, is important because it reminds you of the days when we offered sacrifices. So it's perfectly set up with ritual foods. And each food teaches you a value. And finally, I think the Seder is important and attractive. You and I know it's important, but the question is, from the Pew study, why is it so attractive? And I think, even though I'm intellectually effete and I believe that ideas matter more than they really do matter, I think, but I believe in ideas. The idea of freedom and living your life without freedom as the greatest of all curses, I think that's the message of the Seder, that you can't live a life, no matter how much garlic and quail and other stuff that the Israelite people were screaming that they wanted back from Egypt, and they were upset that they didn't have, because they had this manna in the desert instead. Even despite all the good food of Egypt, you didn't have the one thing you need to be human, and that was freedom. And so it's a story about what every human being needs. It's the one thing we need. It's the one thing that gives us our humanity. It's the one reason God can't fix all the evil in the world, because we have freedom of the will. Freedom is the one virtue you can't do without. So that's my list of why the Seder is perfect. And of course, for not also add one final thing for Tommy, the Last Supper for Jesus. was a Seder meal, according to two of the synoptic gospels.
I want to propose something a little more abstract.
Okay.
The Seder is structured, at least the Magid section, the telling part of the Seder, is structured to bring us to one moment. And that's that first remarkable moment on the other side of the Red Sea. And it leads us into that moment, right? We were slaves, our parents were slaves, our grandparents were slaves, their parents were slaves. Slavery was brutal. Slavery was oppressive. Slavery stripped us of our dignity, our humanity. And we had no hope because we believed that we would be slaves and our kids would be slaves and their children be slaves. Comes along this fellow Moses, says, pack your things, we're leaving tomorrow. According to the Midrash, only a fifth of us, only 20% believed him. The rest stayed behind. Came the plagues. We saw in front of us Pharaoh and his power being diminished, being degraded, being destroyed. And then he comes and says, now, we're leaving now. And we said, hey, wait, we got to wait for the bread to rise. And he said, no, take it as it is. We're running. And we ran out of Egypt. And we ran to the banks of the Red Sea. And we breathed for a moment. And then we heard Pharaoh chasing us behind. And then we...
Wait, what happened then?
Yeah, we turned to him and we kvetched. Because Jews have this exquisite ability to kvetch. Even with death being imminent, with this danger tearing down the hillside looking for us, we turned to him and in a beautiful soliloquy pronounced, there weren't enough graves in Egypt. You brought us out here to die in the desert. And he said, shut up and listen, shut up and watch. And he holds his arm over the sea and we cross the sea and we ran, and then he puts his arm back and Pharaoh is drowned in the sea and we stop. That's the moment. We turn around and there's the vast expanse of the wilderness and we take our first breath as free people. That's the moment. Michamocha bailim Adonai. That's the song we sing. Because at that moment, we realize something. There is hope. That's what the Seder is about. There is hope. Henry Ford, God bless him. Henry Ford said, history is just one damn thing after another. But the Bible has a different idea. You know, in creation, in Genesis, water represents chaos. And on the second day of creation, God divides the water to allow dry land to appear. That's dividing the chaos to allow an ordered natural universe to exist, a cosmos where we can predict the laws, the patterns of nature, and live in this world. In Exodus, the waters are divided again. Only this time it's the chaotic waters of history, represented by slavery, which is the worst chaos of history, the complete dehumanization of one human being by another. And out of that chaos comes an ordered history, a journey from the house of bondage to the promised land. And the promise of the Seder is there is hope. And I think that what brings us back, I mean, I'm sure you're right. You're absolutely right, of course. Family brings us back. The rituals, the songs, the melodies, everybody sings Dayenu, that brings us back. The exquisite structure of the thing brings us back. But deep down, I think what brings us back, and I think the message that we need to pronounce to our children and to our children's children, particularly the ones who are alienated, there is hope. There is hope. Because without that hope, if you believe that the world ultimately is ruled by Pharaoh and that might makes right, and there is no possibility of liberation, and there is no possibility of regaining dignity in the world, then you sit in your private space. So it's Kohelet, it's Ecclesiastes. You go out and let everything that pleases your eye, you want to acquire and buy. You sit in your private space and enjoy your own comfort, but you do nothing for nobody because there's no hope. But the moment you admit hope into the world and can talk about taking a step, one step from Egypt toward a promised land, then we gain responsibility. It's our job to create a culture, a community that is dedicated to all the values that were denied in Egypt, to create a society that's the opposite of Egypt, a society of gentleness, a society of caring, one step at a time. Now that there's hope, that's not a futile vision. Now that there's hope, that's not a wasted effort. I think the proposition of hope is the very, very best thing about the Seder.
Bravo, bravo. Yay, 2 thumbs up. However, let me just ask you, what is the source of hope?
And the source of hope
is
a God of history.
Bingo.
Who is more
So
powerful, who is more powerful than Pharaoh.
Right.
That's the point. That's the sentence.
Correct. But let me just make the tweak that the message of the Seder is not hope, but faith. It's faith in God. Okay. Faith in God produces hope. I had a conversation once with Chris Hitchens, privately, the great atheist, raconteur. May his memory be blessed. I'm sure he was surprised to get into Olam Haba, that there was such a place. But I asked him, so Chris, I understand you've refuted belief in a God that no one believes in. The God who's walking around in the Garden of Eden, and the God who's physically doing this and this, and who is the God that children believe in. You haven't refuted Maimonides' God. You haven't refuted Spinoza's God. And he said, you're right. And I said, let me just ask you, you're a hopeful man. What is the source of your hope? And he said, well, that's the best question anyone's ever asked me, isn't it? And I said, yes, probably. And he said, luckily, no one's ever asked me that in public. And the point was made that everyone, whether they're religious or not, can buy into, yeah, you need hope. Everyone can buy into that message. But the problem is hope has to have an origin. There is a reason you believe you aren't just material. And that is the belief that you have a divine soul. The reason you believe you have a divine soul is you believe that God is in you in some real way, just like consciousness is in you in a real way. And no scientist can point to consciousness. They can point to your brain, but they can't point to your consciousness of being Eddie Feinstein or Mark Ellen. So as long as we say faith, I would agree. And it's the same moment you mentioned, that when they pass through the sea, I'll leave out the song they sing, which I'm not in favor of, which is horses, Sus Varakwa Yirabayam. They're singing a song, thank God you drowned the Pharaoh's army and threw him.
Adonai Ish Milchama.
Ish Milchama.
A god of war, right?
I'm leaving that behind. But what I do quote and what I do believe, and what is the source of my hope, and what is the inspiration of the Exodus for me, just as it is for you, the same moment on the other side of the sea, Eddie, Vayaminu Badonai. Mm-hmm. They believed in God. Mm-hmm. This entire enterprise of getting Egypt out of the people worked for a brief moment. What is that in the musical? For a brief and shining moment in Camelot? Mm-hmm. Brief and shining moment. They believed in God. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they start fetching again, and then it turns all bad. And by the end of the Torah, of the Tanakh, we're exiled from the land. It's actually the Jewish tragedy. People don't think of the Tanakh as a tragedy, but it is. So, faith. Now, the question, if you want to get into the deep question, how can we still believe that God is a God who splits the Red Sea and brings people out of slavery to freedom when there are so many people in slavery and there are no split seas around? How do we still believe in a God who operates that way? And I become like the Maimonides and Spinoza in that, and I say that isn't God. That was a story about what happened, and whether it happened in history or our memory of history, we must make our own history based on our belief that the universe of all beings includes a being who is perfect, not involved in history, except to give us freedom and send us on our way with a law that will bring us redemption. That's God's purpose. Like Aristotle said, God's purpose was thought thinking itself, the unmoved mover who started the spheres all moving around. That was God's job. That was it. I believe in a kind of Maimonidean and Neoplatonized Aristotelianism, which is God's job was to give us freedom, give us a mind, ability to know good and evil, and to send us out into a world that was not finished, and that we could finish or we could screw up, and that God would always be there with us personally as a source of comfort and hope, but that God is not going to destroy the tyrants. That's our job. God is not going to split the sea. It's our job to build bridges over the seas. And I believe that the Seder is a story of faith.
So my father, who you well know, my father's a really deep person, and he was watching once a lecture by Christopher Hitchens on TV, and he was very disturbed. I know this because he calls me as soon as it's over, and my father, when he gets excited, you can hear it on the phone. It's like, Ed, and his question to me was this. He said, Hitchens is talking about God, but the God he's talking about isn't the God that Rabbi Schulweis talks about.
Correct.
How come he doesn't know Rabbi Schulweis is God? And I said, that's a very good question. So Schulweis would put the emphasis, what you spoke about was beautiful. And the constellation of values, or shall we say, constellation of essence, of hope, of faith, Schulweis would add a deep sense of responsibility. And the human capacity to transcend our own sort of selfish interests, to reach out beyond ourselves. That's the God that Harold Schulweis always talked about. And my father was very angry that Hitchens couldn't recognize God in that. I said, he just doesn't see God in that. He just sees that as a human thing. And my father said, yeah, but if you know people, you know that's not human, that's God. Right? The capacity of a human being to reach beyond his own interest, to heal another and help another and care for another and teach another and to love another. I mean, that was Rabbi Schulweis's idea of God, godliness, God expressed in human actions, human behaviors. And Hitchens also doesn't address that God. On the contrary, though, as you said, what's so interesting about Hitchens' particular position is that he also was very social activist. I mean, he was very politically very in touch and very concerned about the quality of justice in the society. And Harold would have said, or Schulweis would have said, that's the God within him. That's the God within him. And my father, so that my father points out the idea, so that the other element besides besides faith and hope that we've talked about is this sense of responsibility. It can't just sit with you. It has to then be expressed in something you did, which is why over and over and over again, the Torah gives us commandments and then says, because you were a slave in the land of Egypt, because you know the soul of the stranger, the widow, and the orphan, you were a slave in the land of Egypt. It comes with a sense of moral order. Yeah. You're more of a theist than I am. You're a much better theist than I am, better theologian than I am too. No. Because but
I'm a better golfer than you. That's it. Every other way you win.
Yeah, no, you are. But because I would the way I play it is the question of what universe would you have to live in order to make sense of these things of hope, of responsibility, of a sense of caring, of the dignity that I feel in my own existence when I live that life. I have to live in a universe that somehow supports that. If I lived in a universe that was tragic, that was sad, that was completely dead, then my hope would be foolish, and my efforts at charity, at healing the world, would be foolish as well. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah, that's right. But there are people like Sartre and Camus and others, in some way, the early Kierkegaard, and they would say, look, whether you like it or not, and certainly Hitchens, who would say, you may not like it, but that is the world. Your world is Hobbes' world, homo hominis lupus, a world in which each man is the wolf of his neighbor.
Yeah.
In which we are predators of each other. And whether you like to face it or not, that's it. So that's why I'm a theist. I'm a theist because without God, that world is true. The world of Hobbes and Camus and Sartre is true.
Right.
And so I like to say, and I've written about it in my column, which you can access, by the way, if you Google God Squad articles by Mark Gilman. And my last 6 columns are always up there from my nationally, the syndicated column I wrote. And so I wrote about the story which we talked about of why did some people, it's from Exodus Rabbi 4, where why did they not see the miracle? Why did some not see the miracle? And said because they didn't look up and they were only looking down and all they saw was mud. So the reason the Seder is so great, I guess we can return to this final point for me at least, about why it's so great, is it teaches you to look up. It teaches you to look up. However you define God, whether it's in a Kaplanian way, which is not really God, or but whatever it is, it works for you, it's fine. Or whether it's a more full-blown theistic God like the one that I believe is true, whatever it is, it's the source of you looking up and having hope and faith. And that hope and faith that you look up for enables you to live in the world. If it isn't, my debates with atheists weren't that common, but when they did occur, I would usually use this gambit. And that is, I would say, I'm going to read you a passage from my first teacher, Richard Rubinstein, who was a theist and a great rabbi and became an atheist because of the Holocaust. And it's a column about, it's a passage about how we live in a world of nothingness and we're redeemed by nothing and
right.
Everything is nothing and nothing and nothing. And I said, now, that's what your alternative is. It's God's in the world somehow or nothing. It's looking down and seeing mud or looking up and finding hope. So my question to them was always be this. It's not who's right. Is Rubinstein right and Hobbes right? Are they right? Camus and Sartre, are they right? Or are we right? The question is, can you live with that? Can you live in a world in which you believe nothing matters? Goodness does not matter. Evil happens because it happens, because of power. Mm-hmm. And there is no purpose to anything. And when you're dead, the worms eat you up. The question is not, is that true? I mean, that is a question, but that's one of the mysteries.
Can you live in that world?
Can you live in that world?
Do you want to live in that world? That's also.
Well, whatever you want, can you?
Can you?
Obviously, no one wants to live. Even Sartre didn't want to live in that world. But
but can you live in that world? Is that the world you choose to live in? So the central commandment, the dictum that organizes all of Passover, is the statement in the 10th chapter of the Mishnah of Pesachim. Bechol dor vador, chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, we see ourselves as if we personally came out of Egypt. And then the Mishnah attaches a verse, which is very unusual, by the way. It's usually Mishnah don't come with verses. You know, kakatuv bavur ze shesali Adonai b'tzeti miMitzrayim. When your child asks, why are you doing all of this? You say, because of what God did for me when I came out of Egypt. And you don't say what did for my ancestors. You said what did for me. So the Mishnah expects us to do a very interesting and I think very sophisticated act of religious imagination. Ki'ilu, as if we came out of Egypt. That's what the whole holiday is about. The Seder is our last night in Egypt. We're going to be eating what our ancestors ate so that we can regain a sense of the as if quality. And I go,
well, wait. That's the Mishnah. The Torah is much more direct. It says, Bavur zeh asadonai li, asadonai li.
Yeah.
He did it for me.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean? I wasn't there.
Well,
As the Torah says, you have to, not as if you were there. That's easy.
But that's why you have to assimilate the memory as if you were there. That's the point. You
And
assimilate.
the rabbis try to work around that verse, but I think it's a much more challenging verse.
Yeah.
I think Torah's verse is right. And I struggle with it because it's so right, and it's therefore so challenging. The challenging part is, Eddie, we were there at Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually there. I believe that.
Right. As you said before, because the important part is to understand that the kind of universe that we live in, I think the interesting thing about Ki'ilu, though, is that even if you come to the Seder without that belief, and so many of us do, because it's very hard to walk around. First of all, it's very hard to walk around thinking you were once a slave. It's very hard to believe in the God of history. It's very hard to believe that justice really has some power, some staying power in such a corrupt and deceptive, such a corrupt world, and with all the deception of the world. It's very hard to believe this stuff. So for one night a year, it's Ki'ilu. It's like, come to my Seder, put your skepticism in a box, sit at the Seder, feel the wind of the Red Sea in your face, and join me in this drama. And feel what it would be like to live in that universe.
Precisely right. And my PhD is in European phenomenology. And in phenomenological studies, when I try to explain what phenomenology is to people who don't know, it's very hard because it's a very abstract branch of philosophy. It's like this. It's a theology would be, are angels real? A phenomenology of angels is, whether they're real or not, what do angels mean? And that's what is interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
What the Seder, what the Exodus means. Not whether it was real, I believe it was real, but that's not important. What's important is, what does it mean? And what it means is exactly how you said so really terrifically well, which is the idea of hope and freedom, and that this is the choice we have, and this is the moment. And Ke'ilu, it's as if we were there, or we were there, and that distinction between as if we were there and when we were really there is unimportant at that meal, because we're there singing Dayenu, and we getting ready for the brisket. And that raises a more mundane question that I'd like to close our discussion this week with, although when we close is always your decision. And that is, what are the tough parts of the Seder? What are the problems with the Seder? Mm. And I have one that's on the, you mentioned one before we went on, which was like you to expand on, which is the Magid and how much of it you tell. My problem, which I'd like to put into that basket of not so fast, there's some problems with the Seder. And that is, how many Sedarim actually convene after the meal for the many wonderful things, Eliyahu, the prophet, Elijah, and for the last cup of wine, and for next year in Jerusalem, and Echad Miyodea, and a whole bunch of other great songs. How many people gather together after the meal to finish the Seder? Because I think although 90% have a Seder, my estimate of the numbers who have an after the meal Seder to finish it properly is way below 90%, Eddie.
Listen, I grew up in a home that took Seders very seriously. I mean, the whole family was at the Seder. We went through the Haggadah. We talked about this stuff. We did all the things you're supposed to do. And then as soon as dinner was over, my father would loosen his belt, compliment my mother, and fall asleep. And it wasn't until I was 17 years old that I realized there was a second half of the Seder. And in fact, the second half of the Seder, and here's the problem, I think it's a good one, because the second half of the Seder is different than the first.
Yes.
The first half of the Seder is Pesach le'avar, the Pesach that was. The second half of the Seder is Pesach la'atid, the Pesach that's coming. It's all about messianism. It's all about tomorrow. That's why there's where you open the door to Elijah. because Elijah is the precursor of the Messiah. And you read and you sing all the songs, haggadah, right? My father bought a goat, and then the goat was eaten by the cat, and the cat by the dog, and the stick, and the fire, and the water.
What is that about anyway?
Because the last line is because the God comes back into history and
at the end of time,
death and destroys death. And that's the last part of the Seder, right? That's the last word of the Seder, except for Lishana Haba B'Yerushalayim, which is explicitly messianic.
That is so brilliant.
And the problem is that we can't get to it because we're all busy washing dishes, arguing over politics, or we've fallen asleep after 4 cups of wine. And that's a shame. And you're right. That was a structural flaw in the Jewish tradition.
Yeah, it should have been the whole thing. The whole thing. Gamarnu.
Somebody has to fix it. Somebody has
to fix it.
My problem is the Magid. The most important part of the Seder is the telling of the story. It's what starts with the kids' question, Manishtana halayla hazeh, and it ends with the second cup of wine, which is the cup of history, about how we bless God, and we bless God for the miracles of our history. The traditional Haggadah gives us the section from Deuteronomy, which was the litany recited at first fruits, and then points us back midrashically, sentence by sentence, back to the story in Exodus. Unless you know traditional midrash, unless you've studied this stuff, it's completely opaque. And lots of Haggadahs now have rewritten the Magid so that we can make it accessible to folks. I've done that with my Seder, with my synagogue Haggadah, and lots of families have done it, but it's an open area. I mean, the good news is it's open. We're allowed to rewrite it. We're allowed to tell it in a different way. But I know lots of families have a hard time because they open a traditional Haggadah and know what to do with this. And I think that they need the guidance. So one of the things I would recommend, there is a marvelous website called HaGadotcom, HAGGADOT.com, put together by some wonderfully creative people. And it's about 5 million Haggadahs there. You can find all kinds of Haggadahs, depending on what story you want to tell. There's Haggadahs for kids, Haggadahs for grownups, there's video Haggadahs, there's musical Haggadahs. And what you'll find there are lots of Haggadot that use lots of poetry and reflection from contemporary experience and really help tell the story in a better way. So there's a solution to that problem as well. But the ultimate problem, my friend, is what we started with, which is in the world that we're living in with all of its schmutz, how do I live? How do I understand? How do I live with? How do I grasp a God of history? A God of history. Vayaminu b'Adonayu b'Moshe avdo, that they believed in that God. How do we teach that? And how do we regain a sense? Not just teach it. Before we can teach it, we need to own it. How do you regain a sense of that with all the pessimism and all of the cynicism and all of the difficulty that we see outside? And that's the great, to me, one of the great problems of Pesach. You know, cleaning out the chumutz, cleaning out the crumbs, the sourness, the skepticism, the cynicism. That's the product of living in this culture, living in this world.
If I had to say, that's so wonderfully said, and if I had to say what the theological weakness of the Passover story is, because it's basically perfect. But if I was pressed as to its weakness, it's this. The whole story is about stuff done to us. It's not a story of stuff done by us. And the key to freedom, Ed, is what we do, not what God does for us.
Yeah.
It's what we do. And that is the switch that has to occur as you grow theologically. You have to grow from a person who sits back with their arms folded and say, I don't believe in God. And what's God going to do for me? Yeah, Moses, where's your God now? Edward G. Robinson.
The great Edward G. Robinson.
Oh, he was the best Korach ever. The defining Korach of all time.
Dathan, he wasn't Korach.
Oh, he was Dathan.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, your movie knowledge is so perfect.
Well, only
that's because of LA. That's all LA. You grow up with that stuff. It's like in your
blood. Where's your God now, Moses? Where's your God?
Yeah, Moses. So, but the point is about it that you could say that, you know, what has God done for me lately? But the question that is much more important is, what have you done for God lately?
That's nice. That's
What
very
have you done? You know, what God is sitting around waiting as your servant? Isn't this all about not being a slave? Why do you want to turn God into a slave? Why do you want to turn the Lord of the universe into your personal slave? You know, I played golf with a guy recently. On the first tee, he knew who I was. I live near him. And he says, I'll give you $1 million, Rabbi, if you can tell me why God exists. And I said, okay, I've done this before. And the way it works is, first give me the $1 million, and then we'll work on the other stuff. And he said, but it was not a joke, because he said, my daughter died, and when she was young, and I can't believe it. And I said, look, guy, this isn't the place to talk about it, but if you want to talk about it, we'll talk. And now that it's been years since her death, I can ask him the question which I would ask my theology students, and that is, show me the deal that made you so angry at God. Show me the deal. The paper. I want the paper, the actual deal, because I know lawyers and I want them to review the paper. The paper that says, I, God, will never let anything bad happen to you. Signed, God. And then your name is on top. Just give me that deal, would you please? Would you send that in to me? Because I've looked my whole life as 40 years as a pulpit rabbi. Next year is my 50th year in the rabbinate, Eddie. And I've looked all my life for that deal, for where it's written. It ain't written anywhere.
Of course.
The promise is not that God will give us a life without bumps and bruises. The promise is that God will give us a life where we're not alone, where we're not unaccompanied, where we're not supported and given succor and hope to go on. Not that it's the difference between pain and suffering. That's what is a Buddhist teaching I learned when I studied Buddhism. You can't eliminate pain. If you bang your finger with a hammer, you're going to feel pain. But you can eliminate suffering. Dukkha, they called it. It's the first of the noble truths. That dukkha exists, suffering exists, and there is a path, a marga, they call it a halacha, a marga, a way that solves suffering. Suffering is our reaction to pain. That you have control over. You have control over your reaction to pain. You don't have any control over pain, which means all the bumps and bruises of life. But how you will integrate them, you know, and we all know people who have been through hell. There are many reasons I believe in God, but one of them was, and I like unconventional proofs for God, Ed. And one of my first unconventional proofs for God, Peter Berger, by the way, in A Rumor of Angels, has several wonderful unconventional proofs for God. Lullabies are my favorite there. A Rumor of Angels. My proof for God that I love, that's deepest in my heart, was the first time I heard a Holocaust survivor laugh. I said, damn, there is every reason on earth and in heaven and in hell for this person to never, ever smile again and never laugh again.
Yeah. So
when they laughed, despite afal pi v'lamrot hakol, despite everything, they laughed. I said, damn, if they can laugh after the Holocaust, which means they can affirm life.
Yeah.
To laugh, you have to be able to affirm life. Then I can affirm God. And that's how I was able to split from Richard Rubinstein. And why my theism is so deep, because I was trained by a powerful atheist.
Right.
And I had to push against him. And he was smarter than
how to
me,
talk. Right.
better read than I was. And so that's my feeling about it.
So my parents, my parents early in their lives were the founding members of a kibbutz in Israel. They came back to America after, Hashem Sayir, a non-religious kibbutz.
Yeah, I talked
came
to
back to America at a certain crisis in the life of the movement. So when we went, when I was of age, I went to Israel for my year in university, and I would visit the kibbutz all the time. I spent the summer there, and then I'd go up all the time to visit the families. There was a family that was close to us, so they invited me to Pesach. Now, Pesach in a Hashomer Tzayir kibbutz is extraordinary because they take it with tremendous seriousness, clean everything. So,
Why?
dining room, no, I'll tell you why. Because what you just said a moment ago, because they set the dining room with beautiful white tablecloths. They set it with Seder plates. I mean, everything's set, and they have a haggadah. And the haggadah tries to fix what you just said a moment ago. It's not something that happened to us. It's something that we did. We're the subjects of our history, not the objects. That's what freedom is. And
we left Egypt because what?
I'll tell you what it is. Let me tell you the story. So the haggadah is all these readings about we are the subjects of our history. We are the subjects of our history. So instead of we left Egypt, there's this long section in the Magid where they have testimonies from the ghetto fighters during the Holocaust.
Yeah.
No, it's very important. The ghetto fighters.
It is important. No, you're right.
And that becomes the Magid, the telling section, the freedom celebration on the Hashomer, on the non-religious Shomer kibbutz. So I'm a young philosophy student, rejecting everything. I had hair back then. And my kibbutz father, Aaron, who's such a sweetheart, is sitting with me. And I said, Aaron, he's Canadian, so I could speak English with him. I said, Aaron, this is beautiful stuff, and this is moving and powerful, but they lost. I mean, the Nazis killed every one of these guys. How can we celebrate, the fact that justice, freedom wins in the end? If the fact is that the reading we're doing are from people that were taken by the Nazis. And he looked at me with such pain in his eyes, and he said, of course that's true, but look around you, Eddie. You're on a kibbutz. You're sitting with 300 families who have settled in the, in Wadi Ara, settled in this beautiful spot in the land of Israel, who have built this kibbutz. We've raised our children in Israel on freedom, on Jewish land, speaking Hebrew. Yes, that particular effort to fight back the injustice of the world failed, but we're in the process of succeeding. It was a very interesting moment. And I think that's exactly what the Haggadah gets to. Well, let's thank you, Mark, for sharing this. And to everyone, we wish you all of your success in cleaning and preparing for Pesach. We will be back next week. The Seder is a week from tonight, a week from Saturday night. We will be back next week, Shabbos morning, to continue our conversation about Pesach and to help you get ready as well. Just a reminder that now that we have a minyan, following this, we have Shabbos morning services, of course. Tonight, Havdalah is at 8 o'clock. Every morning, 8:30 Sunday morning, every morning at 7:30, Monday through Friday. Thursday morning is the Siyum Bechorim. So if you are a Bechor, if you're a firstborn, you're obligated to fast, but it's a light fast, so you're able to break the fast if we do a little learning together. So join us 7:30 for minyan, and following that, I'll do a little teaching, and then we'll have a little feast together. Friday night, we have our regular, every night we have minyan at 6 o'clock now. Friday night, Kabbalat Shabbat. And then Pesach starts on Saturday. Wednesday night, I'm going to be teaching with my friend Phil Barron, the cantor of Valley Beth Shalom, just a little Pesach preparation. We call it Yontif University. We're going to talk about some of these themes, how to make your Pesach more meaningful, deeper, the deeper philosophical and religious truths of Pesach, and some great songs to add to your Seder. So join us Wednesday night at 7 o'clock for an hour of learning, preparation for Pesach. And Mark, thank you. Have a great Shabbos. Take care.
Love you, Eddie.